Welcome to another episode of She Unleashed. She Unleashed is, of course, brought to you as a corporate woman who is aspiring to make the bold moves, the bold changes in your space, or an entrepreneur that is looking to also grow and pivot into, global arenas, but also grow maybe within locally. Today, we're talking about a very good topic. We are talking to two phenomenal women who founded an organization that was not going to talk about gender parity only, but they decided to make a change. The organization is called Pendulum Group SA, and it is focused on two elements of corporate. It is focused on the recruitment side of things, where they are intentional about bringing women into the corporate tables. The second part is, of course, making sure that they get there, they get a voice, and they become effective. You'll have to hear it from them, but I'm very excited because we have stopped talking about the whining part. We're doing things to really effect change. Ladies, welcome on board. Welcome to you, Ali, as well as Mpho, and it's such an honor to have you guys on board.
Thank you, Pumza. It's an honor to be here, and thank you so much for having us today. We're excited for the conversation.
Absolutely. And we had just a chat just prior to recording, and it was as authentic as you can have it, ladies. It's going to be such a great show. You need to hear what the ladies have to say about what they're doing. Mpho, welcome to the show, and tell us, who is this Mpho, and what inspired you to be part of these women who were just out there and decided that they will co-found an organization like Pendulum Group?
Thanks, Pumza. Who is Mpho? I am an entrepreneur. I'm an actuary by profession, but I'm also just someone who cannot avoid being passionate about women, being passionate about people in rural areas, because that is who I am. And I come from a background where it was stressed to us that there were no tasks for men or tasks for women. I come from a line of very strong women. A village of women raised me. So for me, when Ali invited me to this project, I was honored, because anything to do with correcting this discomfort I feel, it does not make sense on any level, whether it's moral, business case, whatever it is. Inequality will never make sense to me. It makes me uncomfortable because it's not where I come from. So I am passionate about this, and I found myself in this simply because it is in honor of the way I was raised. It is correcting the wrongs I've seen as I've grown up, and it's in trying to ensure that, can we please just have a generation that's not still fighting this? So essentially, that's who I am.
Yeah, amazing. I am so inspired by your taking the, bull by the horns and deciding to do something. Ali, what on earth were you thinking about when you started this? And what is the vision behind this organization? What do you want to see to say you have succeeded now in what you're doing?
Awesome, Pumza. I think, as Mpho said, I mean, for us as young women in corporate SA, and we have both got a corporate background prior to entrepreneurship, I think a lot of the stories we have shared between friends, between fellow colleagues, you start to question, are these really the experiences that women are having, today in 2021? How are we still having these conversations? Like, it could be, flashback to 20 years ago, and it seems as though nothing has changed. And so I guess, as you can hear, Mpho and I are both incredibly passionate about particularly women in the workplace, particularly, eradicating any form of inequality that exists in today's world. And we started really as a group of women who have experienced certain things, learned from others, to say, well, what are we doing to actually implement, I guess, a solution, and not just talk, not just perhaps complain. And it really stemmed from a bit of research, obviously, around, I kind of assumed that there were a whole lot of companies doing this, to be honest, in South Africa. I thought, well, of course there are, I'm sure, loads of gender consultancy firms in South Africa. I'm sure there are loads of recruitment firms that only represent women. And when this idea was born to say, well, how do we actually make a difference? How do we actually empower organizations with the tools to empower women? Pendulum was born, and it really was through the lack of what we could see the drivers within the corporate space for gender inclusion. And I think, it was born from a passion. It was born from, a desire to make a change. And like you said, Mpho, it was born to say, please, can we not have the next generation facing the same struggles that we are? And so Pendulum was founded and born.
But now tell me, what does that mean about the phase that we are in this fight about gender parity? The fact that you came into the market, you researched, and there still were no organization speaking to the essence of what we want to see happening. Because you see a lot of advocacy work. But to get to the crux of the matter where we address the core, what does it say about the stages that we are in as women and the conversations that we are having? Maybe Mpho, if you can come in, and then Ali will come in and add on to that.
I think as with any problem, and I actually want to call this a crisis because it is. And I think we've seen these crises that we keep delaying. We've seen as South Africans what happens when you delay a crisis. This is a crisis. And with any crisis, people want to fix it quickly. People want to, especially the people who care the least, want it just solved so that it's off their desk, off their problems. And I think, as a result, there have been a lot of tick box exercises that have been applied in the past. So we have thought that with the right regulations, inequality will be solved. 27 years later, we've seen that is not true. We have thought that, by trying to create sort of incentives for more inclusive leadership in organizations. We have awards and things highlighting organizations where there's women CEOs and women in the leadership team. We thought that that'll be enough, and it isn't. We thought that by seeing more of us, more women on boards and as senior management, we can tick those boxes and a company can report to their AGM that they've increased their leadership, it'll be enough, and it isn't. So I think we're now at that stage where we're seeing that, okay, it's not going to be a quick fix. And there's more deeper change that is required. It's a culture change. And that's something that actually popped up in our earlier discussions. It's a culture shift. It's not just about the intent. And I think that's what attracted me most to even this idea that Ali was forming in her mind about Pendulum. That recruitment is the first step. But the actual experience as a woman in that organization, as I progress, do I see a place for myself in leadership? Will I be supported when I'm a leader? Or will I just be a face and a mouthpiece for the actual leaders? So I think now we're seeing that it needs deeper change. Maybe it needs a bit more time. We're seeing that we're not meeting our targets. We've failed every sustainable goal, target, whatever that we've ever created for women. We haven't achieved it yet. So I think we're starting to acknowledge that. That's where we are now.
Ali,
absolutely.
She is so spot on.
Absolutely. I mean, just to add to what Mpho was saying, for us, it really is about, I think, changing the experiences that women are having in the workplace. It isn't just about now, and I think that's fairly where we've been through, is around saying, oh, well, women have a seat at the table now. There is change, there is progress, but it's not enough. We're not just talking about a seat. We're talking about, a voice. We're talking about, do I truly have an opinion that's actually valued, or am I just sitting here because someone ticked a box, and now we're sort of inclusive and diverse because we have a woman on our board. And I think exactly to what Mpho is saying, it's really about changing the experience that women have within corporate SA. And I think the difference on where Pendulum comes from, as an entity, because there are wonderful, incredible companies out there, Colleen Larson at Business Engaged driving these conversations for many, many years. And I think what we're trying to, really shift in the place is saying, it's not always just around making a noise and making a fuss about women in the workplace and sort of, constantly bringing up perhaps the same conversations, but we really want to work with companies to empower them with the tools to empower women. And I think, that's what we're talking around, it's really about going from the grassroots, looking at your graduates all the way through to developing the leaders all the way up through to the top within an organization from a gender lens perspective. And as true to the name, you know, bringing back that balance to the workplace. And I must be cautious what I say. I always say bringing back the balance. And one of my colleagues is quickly there to reference, there was never balance. So it's not about bringing it back, but it's actually about bringing balance to the workplace.
Absolutely. We had a very interesting discussion that was almost saying that it's an evolution. It's not been a static move. We also are finding ourselves that at a point, Pumza would get her injuries at a corporate environment. She would get her incidents, whatever it's called. She would exit the organization, and everyone was licking their wounds but putting up a facade. It looks like we have progressed because we're getting into the essence of the things. And like Mpho, you said, it's a systematic issue. It's not about just having you on board. How are you finding women also coming up now and having much more improved conversation about what, in essence, they're experiencing once Ali places them on the table? Mpho, that's for you.
Oh, it's for me.
Yeah.
So, you know, one thing that we're finding is that when women are honest, they are admitting to the fact that they're completely disenfranchised in those positions. You know that you have a board that maybe you weren't their first choice or even their second choice. They desperately needed a woman. Someone recommended you. Maybe you appear in a number of other boards. You know, we had a discussion earlier even about how it's so easy for even us to look at some of the women that are leading organizations today and criticize them because we think if I was in that position, I would have already changed management. There would be at least 40% women in management. I would have changed the board. I would have changed the strategy. But increasingly, and if you look at recent articles about management shifts in some of our leading organizations, you see just how much, if you don't have the support of the board, the support of your shareholders, support of your management team, the people you're trying to lead can either make or break your leadership. If you don't have the genuine buy-in of those people and the trust of those people, because you need to trust your leader is going to take you on a path that sometimes you won't understand. And our women are placed in those positions where there isn't trust in what they're doing. So it can't be implemented even to the standard that she had designed. So we judge them unfairly because they won't succeed at what they had initially come to do. We judge them unfairly because they haven't transformed the organization after them. I mean, we were speaking with Ali earlier about how we are actually going backwards in some of the statistics right now, because after that amazing woman gets put on the board and then she doesn't do as well as everyone thought, then a man replaces her. So there isn't even succession planning after her to replace her because it's not just about her. So we're starting to see that there's more to this experience. It's not just leaving them at that seat at the table and you've won. It's a tough position when you don't think you actually own the seat, when you feel like you're just renting it.
Absolutely. And you're touching on the crux of the matter because it is that. I mean, some of them, the exit is just a one-liner, or maybe at certain points, even much more, glossy and thanking you about your, contribution during the time. But it is never mentioned. It's either you're pursuing your interest or something. And you can almost feel that exit, as much as it's attempted to be dignified, there are subtleties of what the truth is always about. What is this hostility about, Ali? Why are we not allowed to come in as I'm thinking now about a context of saying you are technically capable, you are a strategist, you have the years behind your back. What is this intending to prove? The fact that competent women, I mean, some are even scared to even lift their hands because they know how they can really damage their careers by taking on bolder, positions. What is this hostility about?
Yeah, I mean, Pumza, it's a good question. It's one that we as you mentioned, discussed around. I think the crux of the question is, are women potentially sometimes, set up to fail? There's something called the glass cliff. And in essence, it's saying that, are we hiring women into positions where they are sort of doomed to fail? Is it window dressing in its ugliest form? And that's something that, I think on a broader spectrum is really looking at how do we eradicate that from a woman's perspective? I know, Pumza, you and I have spoken about, that sort of imposter syndrome and how does it impact how a woman shows up at work? And do we sort of self-sabotage because of how we feel? And like you said, we sort of create the space where we've only rented the seat. We don't really belong here, So are we sometimes our own worst enemies? And I think through Pendulum and the work we're trying to do to empower women in this space is to really shift that mind thinking, because even if that isn't the case and we are welcomed, do we have the courage to really lead at the forefront? I mean, it's been incredible chatting to some of the leading women who, for me, I'm intimidated by, CEOs of big companies. And I chat to them about their interest in, I guess, being independent directors on other boards and can we help facilitate that conversation for them in their career. And it's incredible how I assume that these women have, all the power in the sense of their own conviction, their own leadership, their own ability. And it's amazing to see even how they themselves in these already senior leadership positions doubt their capability. And where does it come from? Why do we as even leading women already feel this way? And it's part of something that at Pendulum we're trying to also address through, a mastery class around board readiness. What does it mean and how can we be ready to be women on boards and truly, embrace that seat and enable ourselves to thrive in that position and sort of, not let this glass cliff be something that we all fail to.
How are we faring with the world, Mpho? If you're looking at globally, where do we stand? Are we really the worst kind of country, or is this a general issue across the world?
So, I actually like this question because it's quite interesting. So if you take a step back, because obviously I have my views, but if you take a step back and you Google South Africa and you say, okay, how is South Africa doing? You'll actually see a lot of positive things and well-deserved positive things. I think we don't praise ourselves enough. So we're praised for our progressive laws. There are countries that are seeking to emulate some of the laws that we have in place, especially for high-ranking positions in government and lesser so in corporate. For instance, the 30% Club, South Africa, that Ali mentioned earlier, they've regularly reported on how we were pretty much on par with international standards, although we keep missing our targets. And we're actually rated 19th, if I'm not mistaken. Last rating, we're rated 19th out of 149 countries by the World Economic Forum for gender equality. So on the face of it, you could think that we're doing quite well. And I think what it comes down to is that I notice it even with international peers, that the gender discussion actually happens a lot more here. We're very good at that. We're very good at discussions. We're very good at plans. And I'll give us that. But then when it comes to the action is where I have an issue. For me, it's almost like when you tell your parents that, everyone failed, so my 49% is okay. For me, it actually doesn't matter so much where we're ranking. It's just an initial sort of measure to just see. But I think if we're comparing ourselves against a world where inequality is so rife, being number 19 of what? It is not something that we should be celebrating. I don't think we're in a place where we should be pausing and patting ourselves on the back. You have Stats SA reporting recently about the unemployment levels, and they're pointing out, that it's disproportionately affecting women. So in that top 19, if you take into account our high unemployment levels, we have a lot of unemployed women now. And men are finding it easier to get back into the labor market than women. So what is happening now with that gender gap? So I would say that yes, on a global scale, yes, we're not doing too badly. but as the globe, we're doing badly. As the globe, we're missing our targets. So we should not be celebrating anytime soon. Sorry.
Tell me, Ali, if we were trying to move away from the gloom, the doom and gloom, what would corporates need to do to really intentionally effect change? What are the steps that they can take for us to see that, now they are meaning business? It's different. It's not lip service anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Pumza, how do we go from what I guess Mpho was talking to, of just talking about it, but actually actioning something, and there are obviously a lot of things that corporates can do, but I think if I just highlight a few of the really sort of basic ones that we believe really do have true impact and are quite practical, to implement. And I think first off is obviously, and for us, kind of the lowest barrier to, I guess, achieve or get buy-in is really to ensure representation in terms of a diversity of talent, easiest way is to ensure that we have hiring strategies that are inclusive, and really around inclusion is still the essential driver of inclusion. Is really around having those diverse teams, having more women within your teams. So that, I think, as a strategic step to ensure that your hiring practices are inclusive, is a first and simple one to achieve. But, like we've said, it really goes beyond just having women within the workplace, but actually around the experience. And that's really going to shape whether women remain and thrive within your organization. And so for us, another easy, well, perhaps not easy, but another suggestion is really around leveling the playing field for the advancement of women, for equal pay, for equal opportunity. But the key is to do it through transparency. There are tools that you can use that really help to measure and showcase, whether it be promotion and what are the sort of criteria behind why individuals were promoted or why pay was, provided in terms of advancement in that space. So I really think it's about taking the bias out of a lot of these processes with transparency and reporting frameworks that are quite simple to implement, if done well. I think one of the key elements, which is often potentially sometimes quite controversial, is around saying building those diversity targets into incentive structures often actually drives different behavior. We often get asked, how do you actually instill the notion of inclusion into your culture and into behavior? And that often comes through actually driving it through certain remuneration and incentive structures, make it a target. I think one of the really important things for us, and something that we often talk about, is really strengthening and empowering and enforcing leaders to be accountable and have the capability to drive diversity and inclusion conversations. Too often when we chat to companies, it falls on the HR manager's shoulders or the diversity and inclusion leader, but it really should be about placing leaders across the organization. We're talking about leaders and managers at the heart of the conversation. Really about emphatically holding the leaders to account when we progress and talk about diversity and inclusion. And I think another aspect that really for us has impact, and again, it is really about fostering a sense of belonging. So really, unequivocally supporting women within organizations. And, we talk about these things through kind of trying to make them practical, so we can often talk about these things that sometimes people's eyes gloss over, and they sort of say, okay, well, we understand we must, create an inclusive culture. We must embrace women within organizations. We must promote them. We must give them equal opportunity. And for us, of course, that is exactly what we're talking about. But some practical tools, diverse hiring policies. Let's talk about those and implement them. Let's talk about analytical tools that we can put in place for transparency reporting around certain targets for strategy in terms of women empowerment. Let's put in zero tolerance policies around discrimination within the workplace. Let's implement internal strategies internal surveys around how do we explicitly measure belonging within an organization. Because I think for me, belonging is a big part of what inclusion and inclusivity actually means. As you say, we can have wonderful women in leadership positions or promotions within organizations, but if they don't feel they belong, if they don't feel they actually have value, then really is a lot of it just a tick box exercise. We have 50 men to women, but if I had to ask them, how do you feel? Are you valued? Are you heard? Do you have equal opportunity? What is the true essence there? And so gathering that data to drive an initiative is a great way to impact real change.
Mm-hmm. And we almost, when we talk about the gender parity discussion, it almost feels like it's two worlds. It's the men against the females. Oftentimes, the problem comes through other females who are not supporting each other. What are the conversations that we are not authentically having as women to really progress the gender discussion? Or maybe the majority that we're not having, that once we think we're there and on the table, we think it's a limited seat. Therefore, I have to fight by all means to retain my seat on the table. And this kind of does not happen on one level only, where it's the top level. It almost feels like it can happen at any level. Sometimes the lower levels of females are also not supportive of women once they get there, and they'd rather maintain the status quo. What are we not saying to each other as sisters about supporting each other, Mpho? And what can we do better?
The level of honesty maybe that we're scared to have about just how insecure we all feel. And I think, what Ali touched on about speaking to senior women that we think have got it sorted. And you see just how they still feel insecure in those leadership roles. They still feel isolated. They know that they don't really have as much of a voice as they think, or they know that they're one bad decision away from being removed, far more easier than their predecessors or even those who will follow. So I think that those honest conversations are not jumping to the usual reasons that we'll jump to. We'll jump and say that this person only wants to empower themselves. This person doesn't want other women in the room. Maybe she just has no power to be bringing more women into the room. I also think an important discussion, I remember years back being pulled into mentorship discussions. And I thought, it's too soon for me. People don't want to speak to me. They must go speak to someone who's far more accomplished, someone who's done a whole lot more. And, when I started getting really forced into it, you realize that at every level that you are, there's someone who could benefit off of your experience, your exposure, your knowledge. So as women, we need to also be remembering that we can't be waiting. It's like we're all waiting for this one day. One day I'll give back. One day when I'm settled. One day when I've achieved X, Y, Z. Then I'll bring more women up. But I can't bring women up just to the second floor if that's where I still am. And I need to be thinking of that. I need to be thinking of a succession plan in everything that I'm doing. So that it's not just about how they brag about how they empowered me. They must brag about all the women after me that also were given that role or given that opportunity. So I think, and it's a heavy burden because you are still fighting for that seat, fighting to not rent that seat. But I just think we need that awareness early on. We need that honesty early on. And it's perfectly okay to have that honesty amongst us. We try so hard sometimes to adopt the I don't know what it's called, the characteristics that men have. Men won't easily discuss their weaknesses, right? So we think in a corporate context, that's how we should be. But actually, as women, that ability to have that emotional intelligence, to have, that vulnerable moment is actually such a powerful thing. And when you translate some of those values and characteristics that women have that we think we need to leave behind at home when we get into a corporate environment, we actually miss out on the actual business case for having women. We're not having more women to be like men. There's a business case for our level of empathy. There's a business case for our level of awareness, of vulnerability. Increasingly, when you look at some of the scandals that companies experience, maybe it's a badly placed ad or a completely insensitive comment. You think, where were the women in this organization? Why did no one pass this by a woman? Things like that. In this world, there is a business case. Take the morals and emotions aside. There's a business case for having diversity at every level in your organization. There are numbers that prove just how much. I think the Forbes 1000 organizations that have women in leadership have 3 times the revenues of those that don't. There's a rands and cents benefit to diversity. And that diversity requires us to be true to ourselves. It requires us to change leadership. We're not trying to adopt the same leadership we've seen before. So I think that is an important conversation that needs to be had, that it's okay to be who you are, because who you are is what's going to add value. We're trying to change these organizations, not change ourselves.
Ali, there's another side to what Mpho is saying. I almost feel like Mpho, I can almost see myself walking into the expo and being myself, and I just know that the response I'll get, and just being the Pumza that I am, and so on and so on. And sometimes it often feels like the environments are also not ready for a woman to be herself. You deal with boards, you deal with senior leadership that is predominantly male. What is under the surface? What are we not seeing that is persistently driving this system? And I think you alluded to it. We spoke about it briefly. Maybe there's something that we are not touching on. We assume the change will come because the policies are there. Like we always say, for the policies are there, they're beautiful, the values are on the wall. What are we not seeing?
Yeah, I think, Pumzan, I think too what Mpho was talking about, I think what is often a challenge, and it's unfortunate just purely based on the landscape of what the corporate South Africa looks like for women in seats of power. And what I'm really talking about is, what are women doing to empower women? I think a lot of the conversations we're having with clients is, it's often, sometimes the mirror is turned to say to men, well, what are you doing to empower women in the workplace? Let's create male allies within the community of supporting women. And that is a critical component. But I think perhaps what we aren't maybe talking and what we aren't perhaps addressing is, what are women doing to empower women? And I think that's what Mpho was also referring to, or are we basically desperately holding on very tight to our own seat? Does talking about women and empowering women, does it actually just create more competition? So I think to that point, we often unfortunately bring in, what are men doing to empower women? What is the male leadership structure doing to change? Mm-hmm. But we're also placing a lot of what are hopes and dreams of a solution within the hands of someone who's never actually faced this form of discrimination themselves. And now they must come up with a solution to change it. I think what perhaps a lot of the conversations we also have to be having are, woman for woman. And like Mpho said, perhaps it's through our own fears of, maybe I haven't made it yet that I can make a difference. I've got to be at a certain level to be a mentor or to affect change. But there's so many small things that us as women can do to help empower women at every level. And those are a lot of the Pernian conversations we are having with some of our leadership women that we are working with within corporate SA. And I think, unfortunately, that is often a conversation that is tough to have, and we touched on it as well. Part of, I think, a lot of perhaps South Africa's problem is this golden skirt syndrome. We have these wonderful women who are stretched so thin because we know them by name. We see their beautiful faces in the newspapers. So-and-so is now ex-board member. And I guess we all are very chuffed with this. But I think the reality is again, like we said, are these women set up to fail because they are stretched so thin across the board in the seats that they play? And this golden skirt syndrome, which talks to the fact that corporates are going for your sort of, women who have a brand behind them in their own right, a personal brand. And I think that's something to challenge, to say that there is a league of young, incredible leadership women ready to take seats. But it seems that we're, looking for a bit of a surface level on kind of trying to capitalize on more than just what we're talking about, which Mpho, you talked around. The true value in diversity is bringing that vulnerability as a woman, is bringing that empathy that we bring to the boardroom that isn't there, that perhaps is bringing that diversity of thinking. I mean, if we talk about, I think the statistic is that women make up something about nearly 60% of all the consumers in South Africa. So, the people you are talking to, perhaps the marketing, the product design, the development you're talking to is consumed predominantly by women and yet created by men. I mean, I'm not a genius, but that to me seems like there's a slight concern there. Bring in more women. The business case is there. But I think perhaps beyond the economic value that has clearly been proven in the research and the statistics, let's talk about women uplifting women. Let's talk about women empowering women and not viewing women as competition.
And you mentioned a very interesting concept, the golden skate syndrome. And for the longest time, we were not even able to talk about it because of fear of being seen like you're pulling her down. I mean, we are doing the pull her down syndrome. How, in effect, is that really perpetuating the whole fight against, equality? Because exactly to your point, there are specific people, and it always feels like out of the entire population of women, there's only a few that are capable. There's only a few that have been through the ranks. Meanwhile, I think through your recruitment processes and through what you do, you come across incredibly intelligent women that are just not being offered the opportunity. How do we subtly introduce this concept without offending anyone, Mpho, and just trying to say, you know what, enough of this narrative, we've seen these faces, but we believe there's more, as the capable base of women that are ready to take on the reins.
And I think this is an issue of will, because if you really, really believe in inclusion and really believe in correcting, the inequality between the genders, then you're not just looking for the quick fix. And, going back to what we said earlier about putting someone on the board or putting someone in leadership is a trust game. So for me, what this all says to me is that they still do not trust women. And you'll see it because women won't occupy some of the roles that have the most dangerous impact on the business. You'll see a lot of women taking on an exec role or a board role will be either in marketing. You'll hardly ever see women in the finance committee, remuneration committee, etc. But anyway, I think that, it's these women have repeatedly been selected because now they trust them. They know them. We've seen them in every magazine. It's an easy, quick fix that
they won't rock the boat.
They won't rock the boat because they've got too much to handle. They can barely even remember which board is which because they've got so many boards that they've stretched themselves across that they really not. And I mean, this is not even an indictment on their abilities or their skill set, their knowledge, not at all. And I think it's important for us to differentiate that. But it's an indictment on the fact that women, no one should be having that monopoly on board seats. Then what are we doing to our economy and the level of decisions that's happening in the businesses in our economy? So I think there's an element of will that is required in the organizations, but also in these women as well, to actually just take a step back and recognize that. I know that we're all trying to do our best. We're all trying to advance our careers. We all still have that hunger, even at levels that when we look at them and we think they've made it. In their minds, they haven't. They're still working towards a goal. And it's not easy to say no to a great opportunity. But I think it is important for them to take a step back and question how much value they believe they will add to that board, considering all the existing responsibilities, to also think of what it means should they not add that value to the board, what it'll mean for all the women who follow after them. Because will the expectation be that you'll also just be someone who comes in and pretty much votes according to the majority? Or will you also just be a face? Because I know that is likely not their intention. Their intention is not to be a face. Their intention is to take these opportunities and do the best that they can. But they are inherently also setting themselves up to fail. So I think it's an important discussion that has to be had. It should not be the case that we have a woman who's sitting on 6 JSE boards when we have such a huge cohort of young, capable women waiting for an opportunity. And the gatekeepers, both women and men, it's just too much effort for them to trust someone whose reactions you don't already know, or whose thoughts and their stance is already known. So I think that is a conversation also to be had that requires a level of honesty that maybe some might not be ready to have. And it's important, again, like I stressed, it's not an indictment on their abilities. It's not an indictment. We will stay looking up to them. But I think they also need to understand that important role they have in passing the baton earlier not later, like we were saying. It's important to give those opportunities to other women and have that succession planning, even in the boards that you retain. Have a succession plan from day one. Start thinking, because board members get appointed by nominations amongst the board. That is the first place where it starts. Then it gets to the point where positions are advertised, etc. In those nominations, ensure that you are already thinking of the next crop of women that you should be bringing up after you.
Oh, wow. That is such a powerful statement, Mpho. And Ali, it looks like I like the depth of today's conversation because we are not really, pussyfooting around issues. We are calling them for what they are. And it gives me hope that there are organizations that are starting to look deeper into these issues instead of just being, a recruitment agency that is always available to say, we'll present them, but we don't care what happens to them once they get there because we still get our money when we replace. So it looks like Pendulum is, your heart is in the right place. How do we help the organization then to scale and to have a bigger impact in the society?
Yeah, thanks, Pumza. I mean, for us and at what we're trying to do at Pendulum, I think, one of the biggest things we really want to avoid in the workplace is sort of to be seen as a troublemaker or a challenger, something that we are there to sort of wag our finger at organizations or to say, you're not good enough. I think for us, in order for us to make larger scale impact, it's really about collaboration. It's really about saying, we want to be your enabler within your organization, to give you the tools, to create the strategy, to drive the conversations from an external point of view, to enable these organizations to achieve these goals, to achieve diversity. So I think in order for us to, really have impact, it's really about organizations. And I think women within organizations who have these seats and powerful seats to actually help drive this change, either through an external provider like someone like Pendulum, or to just start a conversation that we can help facilitate and drive. For us, like you said, Pendulum is really a company with purpose. It's not a company that's purely driven by profit. Our absolute and ultimate goal is to drive change within the workplace. One of the current goals we have at the moment is 100 young female women graduates in learnership programs in January 2022. And, for us, one of the biggest frustrations we often find within corporates or chatting to perhaps men who have tried to say hire a woman in a leading role is that they turn around and say, we tried, but there weren't any women available, particularly sometimes in industries where women seem to be scarce in sort of leadership or experience positions, say, for example, the tech space. And so for us, coming back to a graduate program is that if we can bring in, 100 young women graduates on learnership programs within organizations that we can facilitate the entire program end to end, where hopefully there is absorption for them in terms of a position, or alternatively, we will place those young graduates within organizations to scale their careers. And for us, what we're saying is that if 100 young women start in January 2022, January 2032, we have 100, experienced young women ready to take up leadership and managerial positions and ready to continue that turn and that wheel. So I think for us at Pendulum, it really is about collaboration. It's about having sometimes those hard conversations. And I think it's often about working with, men who perhaps are under pressure, but not really quite sure where to turn. It's been quite enlightening actually for us to chat to male leaders who kind of are very aware of the lack of diversity and inclusion, perhaps very aware of perhaps some of the behaviors of their leadership team, but not quite sure how to drive change. And so for us, we're here for the conversation, we're here for the support, and we want to speak to you, to really uplift and drive that change internally within the workplace.
This is so refreshing, ladies, and I'm incredibly proud of you for taking a stand, because for what you do, you could either receive a pushback from the market and say, what are you talking about? But you've also intentionally said, no, we're okay, we'll place, but we just need to make sure there's sustainability in what we're placing. But also remember, there's mental health issues as well about the women getting there and not fitting into the environment or being pushed out of the environment. So it really is a very responsible approach to actually just not appoint, but to also make sure that you create the change that we need to see. Where do we find you when someone is looking at Pendulum and say they seem to have some perspective of the answers, or some, they want to probe further and see what you're doing? How do they reach out to you? Ali?
Yeah, Pumza, happy to, discuss with anyone through either, we are big on LinkedIn, in terms of our LinkedIn page, our website, pendulumgroupsa.co.za, or please email, phone call. We're engaged on every platform and very ready to have the hard conversation or to drive the easy conversation. And I think, Pumza, like you mentioned, for us, it really is about, if all we do at the first gate is, like you said, bring more opportunities to working women within South Africa, place more women within organizations, bring that parity. Let's hit that 50-50 or like that 30% target for the JSE members of the board to have women on the board. Let's drive that change. But beyond just giving that seat, for us, it's really about saying, how do we enable women to thrive? How do we enable women to thrive within an organization? Arrive in a place that has open arms, that is completely encouraging, and make them feel completely that their values or their thinking is heard, they are valued within the organization, and they really feel empowered to actually make a difference, which ultimately, I think, Mpho, you spoke about, all of us within our careers, I think there's a personal aspect to our own achievements and aspiration, but is there anything greater than, I suppose, uplifting other women within an organization and that sense of achievement? And so for us, like you mentioned, it's beyond just a seat at the table, but ensuring that women have a voice at the table within Working South Africa.
Wow, you are definitely an organization to watch. I think in the next 6 months, in the next 12 months, I'd like to see what you guys have, unraveled in the market. What have you come across? What are the wins? What are the, I suppose, back to Mpho's point, it's a long-term game. It's not going to be, impressive changes over the next 6 months or 12 months, but it would be very good to note the case studies. What is coming up? What are the issues that are deeper in the cultures of the organizations that we are picking up? And I think we are getting a common thread across, all the different spheres, all the different women. At some point, it was easy to be the only woman and suffer in silence. But now I think women are really coming out and talking some more. So thank you very much, ladies, for engaging us today and really for such an authentic discussion. And I love your bravery, because it is really in that bravery that we start making strides. And it's enough with the superficial discussions. It's enough with just the noise and everything else, because we also don't want to be seen for the noise. We want to be effective in what we're doing, and we want to see effective change. Thank you so much, and I look forward to having you guys again on board, just for us to say, where do we stand, and not to have it as an August discussion only. So to all our listeners, there you have it. Pendulum is available. They are very active on LinkedIn. They also are quite cooperative. They collaborate with women, because really the intention is there. It's not to compete in the market, but it's really to effect change that will have an impact. You can find them on LinkedIn. Ali is very active. Mpho is also very active. You can find her on LinkedIn. And the organization is called Pendulum Group SA. Thank you very much to all our listeners, and we look forward to further sessions with you.